Welcome back into the theatre. This afternoon we have a really exciting conversation between Russell Storer, our Head Curator of International Art, who you all had the pleasure of meeting this morning, and Andrew Meares. Andrew Meares is the Associate Professor I'll start again. Associate Professor Andrew Meares is the Deputy Director of the ANU School of Cybernetics and the lead of Cybernetics Futures, the Cybernetics Futures Group. Andrew brings 30 years of experience as a Walkley award-winning photojournalist at the Sydney Morning Herald. Andrew leads the ANU School of Cybernetics Cybernetic Imagination Residency program and was the lead curator of the exhibition Australian Cybernetics, A Point Through Time. I welcome Andrew and Russell.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone. I know it's been a long day and you're probably all full of scones and tea, but it's going to be a very informal chat between Andrew and me about this work, Jordan Wolfson. Some of you may have seen this work yesterday, but if you haven't, we've got some images that we'll sort of scroll through. I'll just give a brief introduction to the work and why we're showing it here at the gallery, and then I'll hand over to Andrew and then we'll sort of tic-tac. But just to give a bit of introduction to Jordan, Jordan's an American artist based in Los Angeles, born in 1980, who has, from a very young age started to show internationally. So he's a really prominent artist. He had major surveys at the Stedelijk and, big international museum shows in his, early 30s. So he's had an extraordinary career. But an artist who's really singular, I think, in what he does with sculpture in particular. He started out making video works, mostly sort of collaged from popular culture, sort of animation, images from the internet. So he's really an artist who's tapping into this kind of post-internet culture and the way that we receive information and images. But he found after a while that this was really not kind of addressing what he was wanting to address. It was a kind of a passive way of receiving this information, and he really does see the artist as a witness on the world. He really does want to engage the viewer of his work in this experience of the world, but not in this kind of objective or kind of passive way, but in a very deeply kind of personal and subjective way. He sort of talks about coming from his own point of view, his own perspective, and his own kind of emotional makeup, I guess. And he's also an artist who talks a lot about his own kind of vulnerabilities and his own psychology, but then transferring that into this experience with the audience. So he found that sculpture was the most effective way to do that, and began working with sculpture about 10 years ago. And in particular animatronic sculptures, so working with robotics. So a really radical kind of approach to the sculptural figure, and you'll see a couple of images as we go through of some of his earlier works, which I'll talk a little bit about. And he's always, with these works, he's made 3. So body sculpture is the 3rd in his animatronic sculptural works. It's by far the most ambitious and most complex. He's been working on it for the last 6 years. The gallery's been involved with this project for the last 5. So it came to the gallery as kind of a proposal, which the gallery, our director Nick Mitsevich was committed to, and enabled this work to really happen. So it's been a world premiere of this work in Canberra in December, which was incredibly exciting for us. The gallery has one of the world's leading collections of American post-war art outside of the US, a really significant collection, and also a major focus on sculpture in its collection. Of course, you may have seen our sculpture garden and the major sculptural works throughout our collection displays. So it was felt that Jordan was an artist who was really addressing sculpture in the current time in a very radical and a very significant way, and really reflecting our time. And all the complexities and ambiguities and all the challenges of this particular kind of turbulent moment in the world. So his work taps into, our relationship to technology, our sense of identity, the fractures that opens up in society, and I guess how we, we receive so much of our information and so much of our interaction through this kind of mediation of social media, through online culture. So his work is really kind of grappling with all of those things, but in a quite a elliptical way, I guess. So not a direct, certainly over time his work's become less direct and more ambiguous and more complex, and this is certainly doing that. So the work is basically a cube with arms, which is a performance, and it's a choreographed performance of 30 minutes, which runs through a series of vignettes or a series of scenes, which I can talk a little bit about later on, how he's kind of constructed that. But to kind of run through, I guess, this consciousness of this object, as a sculpture, so recognise its own history as a sculpture, so tapping on to references to art history, and then to its own identity and relationship to the space around it and to the audience, and then its sort of realisation of what that potential can be. So, but it's also very much about creating this dynamic between the object and our own bodies and our own experiences, and the actions, which are really or mostly performed by the robotic arms, enact this choreography and create this sense of a being, this soul or this consciousness within this incredibly industrial kind of object. So, Andrew, on to you.
Yeah, so why am I here? Good question. It came with an invitation from Russell and the gallery. I'm lucky to work at the ANU now, and we've been in a conversation with this wonderful I'll call it a learning institution, We're One, asking some big questions and thinking things through. And it came as an invitation to write an essay in the catalogue around Wolfson's work. So the first way I probably encountered it might have been with a blurry video on your phone, I think, and that's just a cube with arms, as you described. I'm like, okay. But it forced me off in two directions. One was to get to know Wolfson. And I found that my journalistic colleagues were a little bit unhelpful in some of the reviews they'd done of his previous works, because his works can be classed as provocative, and I think they're great for the institutions in getting attention, and journos love that. But I felt I had to go a little deeper, because I wasn't really getting the answers. So I spent time just searching out and finding a lot of Q&As with Jordan. And I found he was really opening up in discussions like this with unprompted questions. And I came to the work as a photographer. So I'm used to taking a 3D world and trying to compress it and squash it into my box to give you a 2D rendition, which I hope I can then expand into a 3D format when you view it. So I'm playing through these modalities. But where I resonated with Wolfson was when he just kept talking about observation. And I'm like, oh, I do that. I can relate to that. And photographers don't often speak to that. Like, they'll talk about the image making or the result of that process. What we don't talk about often is just the hours and hours of staring at something and understanding patterns and light and what about, and asking all these really diverse questions around how am I going to render this through to an image. So I started to identify with him a little bit. And there was a big breakthrough moment for me in understanding his practice when he said, I'm trying to create a moment of presence with the work so you open up the possibility of transcendence. And so I think why I read that was I come into an institution like this and I'm no longer thinking about what I've got to cook for dinner, I've got to pick the kids up and this, and I've got to send that email, and I haven't done that. You can just forget all of that and really dwell in the unknown of what's in front of you. And then it opens up these questions within, and it's not just Wolfson's work, there's many here that do that. And so that really unlocked what he was on about. And so that gave me a little bit more confidence to move into it. And then our essays all sitting around the bigger histories. What is it about robots, automata? There's some big, longer stories and imaginaries that we keep rehearsing and telling ourselves. And I think in an age of AI, which is a big interest of our school and society in generally, Wolfson helps us explore that. And so that's how we came to be here.
Yeah, so as you can see with these images here, so this is coloured sculpture, which was the previous robotics work that Jordan made. And you can see this actually has a face and, coloured body sculpture does not. And if we could maybe flick back to female figure as well. So the first work that that Jordan did with robotics, this work here. So again, a figure, so recognisable humanoid figure that kind of dances in front of a mirror, and you come to it from behind the work, and then you sort of move around and you realise, you know, this kind of, I guess, conventionally erotic kind of over-sexualized kind of female figure has this goblin mask. So there's this attraction, repulsion, beauty and horror kind of dynamic. And it contains facial recognition software, so the eyes will actually lock onto yours and follow you, which is an incredibly uncanny experience. So it's this very direct address to the viewer. And he is really tapping into some of these histories of sculpture, and particularly taking the idea of the figurative sculpture, but then laying over it some of these conceptions that really came out of, say, minimalism, which was really about creating this sense of presence, which Andrew just mentioned, and really making you aware of your own particular relationship of your own body to this object in space at this particular point in time and through this sense of a durational period. So it's not this kind of iconic figure that's kind of timeless, it's kind of separated from you by a plinth, but it's on the floor, it's with you in the same space and time, and it's addressing you as a body. So he's sort of taking that principle, but then applying it to this kind of figuration. But then the figures move as well. So this is this other layer of complexity and this other layer of engagement, which we instantly start to relate to, whether we like it or not. And I think, one of the most powerful experiences for me seeing the work was, even though and there's all these cues in the work, that there's all the joints and all the machine parts are very clear, you can see all the articulations here in coloured sculpture, is you still feel emotionally connected to this thing, and you feel there is a consciousness in it, and it's almost, it goes beyond your intellectual kind of, this is an object, a robot, but here you feel it as something human. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
I think one of the ways this was familiar to me was the work of a really incredible person called Yasha Reichardt, who's 90 years young, and I listened to a lecture of hers last week called 5.5 Exhibitions, and she's done 5 incredible exhibitions from the 1960s through to now, and the half was one that was promised but never delivered. So she led us into that. And in 1968, I have some slides coming up later in our talk, she did this incredible exhibition called Cybernetic Serendipity. You can see the crossover in my interest in a school of cybernetics. So maybe I should address that.
Explain what cybernetics is in a nutshell.
It's such a beautiful word, and when I explain it, people go, "Is that all it is?" Like, yeah, that's all it is. It's a made-up word. It comes from the Greek to steer a boat. So think of a tinny, and for those who don't know, it's a small aluminium boat that we go fishing in Australia. So I'm not talking a huge boat, a boat that you can feel the water, the wind, you can sort of hear your speed. So there's a lot of stimulus, a lot of input, a lot of sensorial understanding of where you're at. And then it's talking around direction. So how do we steer? So now I've got wind and currents and things to worry about. So that's the metaphor they're using, why they use that Greek word. But the breakthrough in that, in this post-World War II, so we're just in a period of World War II and just coming out of it, was how do we sense, evaluate and act in the world, not just as humans, but now augmented through technologies. So this is a lot of war technology, but they're drawing on older ideas in human body and movement. So they're really interested in just this simple thing. How do I pick up this glass and drink from it? How does the human body that? How does the human nervous system operate? And how does that happen in a machine? So hence the interest of body sculpture. So there's this crossover between this phrasing they use. We're interested in the communication and control in the animal and machine. And what they mean by that phrase is, how does information or signals flow? And control for them means regulation, as opposed to being out of control. And then animal and machine are just seeing similarities. And so out of that, you get conversations between neurophysiologists and electrical engineers who are seeing the same kind of patterns in telephone relay systems and the human brain. Fast forward, we get generative AI and that whole world around how do we use synapses in the human brains to use logics to do our sort of compute. So we get all these sideways things that spin out of cybernetics, and design effectively is a format of it. And what I mean by that is they're interested in action and response, And then nestled in that is a level of adjustment and learning or adaptation. So as a photographer, I'm sensing the world. I've got to measure the light. I've got to consider. I've got to evaluate it. I'm doing that with my camera. And if I'm on automatic settings, the camera gets to do that bit for me. I've got to make a whole lot of compositional choices, which is now unlocking art history, meaning, all these audiencing aspects. And then there's an action that I take or don't take, repeat. And that's all cybernetics is that flow. So it's an interesting process, things over time, iteration. And I saw it in the talk before around rethink, re-education, change. It's deeply interested in all those topics and pops up in lots of different places. And so in Wolfson's work, it's in the hands. It's using control theory and a whole lot of deep mathematics around how do we get the finger to do this or that. But I look at it in much broader terms, like when I saw Wolfson's, the articulated arm that holds above it, and it's painted this sort of maroon colour, there it is there, and started to annoy me. And I'm like, damn, Wolfson's got me. He's already got me thinking about the work. And then I heard him explain, probably sitting in this chair, that, oh yeah, he wanted to strip back the facade and what's the colour that comes out of the factory when they make it? And that's the colour, it's just the priming paint. And so Cybernetics wants to ask all these questions. How are these components related? What's their relationship? Therefore the dynamics and how do they play together? And then that together makes a system. And that's what Cybernetics studies, is systems. So it doesn't stop there. It's us as an audience, it's this as an institution. And it's a great way to ask questions. And I'm excited, and I should probably stop there.
No, not at all. And yeah, I mean, just coming to, and then obviously there's, our conversation leading up and you're working through for the essay, for the catalogue, but then seeing it actually performing, I mean, what was your first response? I mean,
wow.
Yeah, but I guess there's the, the intellectual kind of, theoretical response, I guess, and knowing coming out of cybernetic theory, but then also your own personal physical response. Did you see a kind of dichotomy between those, or was that quite integrated?
I can't ever not separate some of the inner academic in me in knowing some of the histories of these things or why they're effective. There's a couple of moments. At the very end of the work, am I allowed to speak to and not give away any secrets? At the very end of the work, it balances.
It's all on Instagram anyway.
The performance, I saw two amazing things happen. One, at the very end of the work, it balances on its edge and it just wobbled but never tipped or anything. I'm like, wow, how do you compute that? Like that, and it wasn't. It was just serendipitous. It just happened. And the other moment was when the articulated arm has to go and grab the chain and it missed it. And then the whole thing stopped. The red lights came on. We're like, oh my God, what's happened? And I'm thinking, wow, Wolfson is a genius. This is brilliant. You've got to bring the humans in. And sure enough, a man had to come out, turn it off and on again to reclaim. I thought, wow, that's clever. And they were mortified. The technicians were like, that shouldn't have happened. And I'm like, that was the best bit, because it shows to us the level of maintenance, care, control that all these systems have. And so I always get swept up in these conversations about AI or robots. It's like, yep, a whole lot of maintenance going on, people, and it's going to involve people. And so I would just deeply respect the team that sat behind this, and I'm just astonished at the number of human hours that have had to go in to do that, and then the iterative process that both the technical team and Wolfson's vision, which bring me back to that cybernetics of, I don't know, just give it a go. And so they were often doing the choreography by playing with it, and then it was always in service of, how do I see this fresh? And so that's what I took away when I came back a second time and saw the work. I saw all these new things that I did not pick up the first time. So what we pay attention to really shapes how we see and navigate the world. And I think in your classrooms with your audiences and you shaping your curriculums, keeping, I think, some of Wolfson's freshness of seeing things new is something I'm really taking from this work.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I guess just to explain, I mean, to make this work and his other robotic works, Jordan has worked very closely with the roboticist Mark Satrakian, who's worked a lot in Hollywood and in kind of gaming, or not gaming, but kind of bots, making bots for, so extraordinary technician and creative as well. Mark's a musician as well. And their sort of synergy in terms of how they make the work is extraordinary. So most of the work was made in Los Angeles, and then it was completed, when the work came here. So Mark came out, and there's also a technical team that comes and operates and builds the program at the same time. And every time the work is performed, the operators are there kind of managing it. So it's a consistent process. So it is this dynamic between Mark and Jordan that's really made these works possible. And Jordan imagines this this scene or even a feeling, and it's this ineffable transcendence that you mentioned, and it's how to capture that. And he talks about each of these scenes as kind of intuitive downloads that he had come to him in various points. None of them were stitched together into any kind of narrative particularly. And then over time, he and Mark worked together and iterated it over and over and over again for years. And just to capture this ineffable moment. And when something, he talks about it as a kind of a vibration, when they finally hit on the right pace, the right, gesture, every tiny little iteration was worked over and worked over and worked over until it hit the right point and made him feel it the way he wanted it to feel it. So it's an incredibly challenging process. And, we were there for the journey, and gosh, that was a challenge for us too. But it was just fascinating to watch this particular kind of way of working and how that manifests. And then when it all comes together and snaps into place, and then you experience it as a viewer, you can really see what they're aiming for. And yeah, that was amazing. And just to quickly touch on your point about those little failures, I mean, that was really fascinating because everyone who saw that loved it as well, because we were like, oh no, this is terrible, But everyone's like, that just made it so human. But it was this technical glitch, but it was read as a human, experience. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, and it was a great moment. Not just simply going to pick up, I heard on an artist talk with Jordan and you talking, and Mark gave another talk, the guy who helped build it, in around Jordan had this vision. He'd explain to Mark, I want it to do this. And Mark a bit can't do it. No, there's no way we can do it. And he's talking physics and all these things that are his cultures. And in my world, we call those affordances, what something can and can't do. We often call that an affordance. So Mark was arguing the affordances, we couldn't possibly achieve this. And Jordan was like, what do you mean? I've dreamt it. I've seen it in my head. It can happen because I've dreamt it in my head. And I just really enjoyed that assertiveness, that together his imaginary would be linked to those infrastructures or what was possible. And Mark would have to sort of rethink physics and his computational methods. So I really enjoyed that collaborative aspect. And I think a little bit of us, I want to take a little bit of Jordan's, why can't we do that into some of what I do?
Yeah. And he did talk about too this ability to see everything fresh each time. I mean, he can kind of reset himself because after having to go over and over and over these scenes thousands of times with these minute shifts, but each time to come and see it and without being kind of lost in it was amazing. I mean, he meditates a lot every day. He meditates several times a day just to reset himself. He has this process that he works with, but that has sort of, I think, enabled this to happen the way it has. Yeah. Can we maybe click to the other slide set? So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the references that Jordan was working with. And alongside the exhibition, there's a selection of works from the gallery's collection, which Jordan curated to kind of give little touch points, I guess, for the audience in terms of some of his influences, reference points, artistic moments that kind of resonate with body sculpture. So I start here with a work by Constantin Brancusi, the Romanian artist, a work called The Kiss, and this was a really fundamental pose for the work, and I think you've seen in some of the slides this image of the work embracing itself. And that's also the final scene where the cube is sort of lowered slowly to the floor in this very still embrace. And this idea of stillness and stasis, I think, is a really important part of the work that he's really gathered from this sculpture. So some of the other references. So he's really sort of raking through this history of sculpture, and he's an artist who's very aware of art history and very interested in art history, and and this idea of how bodies are represented. So there's very kind of very formal, hand gestures, mudras, and sort of poses, which I think are drawn from, Hindu and Buddhist sculpture as well as Renaissance sculpture. Mark was really, Jordan was really drawn to working with Mark because his expertise is really in hands, like animatronic hands, and the most realistic hands you can do with robotics is Mark's work. So this was obviously, hands in Buddhist sculpture is incredibly important in terms of symbolic gesture. And Jordan also worked with a number of choreographers and performers as well in terms of the development of the poses. Mime artists, Anne Imhoff, the German performance artist, worked with him. So there's a range of different references and influences that he's drawing in. If we just go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting. I have a clicker. Sorry. Another really important reference was David, the Michelangelo sculpture, and particularly the scale of the hand in relation to the body. So, as you probably know, the hands in David are larger than life. I mean, the work is huge, but in terms of proportion, the hands are much larger than a human hand would be, and that sort of expressiveness that's enabled is really crucial, was a crucial reference in this work. And of course, in terms of minimalism and the cube, I mean, the classic artist is Donald Judd. We have this work on display in the galleries right now. And as I was mentioning, this idea that Judd particularly and artists like Robert Morris were sort of debating in the 60s about the role of sculpture and how it was taking it sort of off the plinth or taking painting out of the frame and then onto the floor, and using this ideas of repetition, of seriality, as a way of really looking at this kind of durational aspect of experiencing sculpture in space at this particular moment in time was a really important touch point as well as this kind of incredibly refined and iconic form. But also its references to industrial culture. But of course, mass production was a strong kind of reference for minimalist artists and their use of materials and ideas of repetition as well. And then there's this kind of objection. I guess one of the things with Jordan's work is his address to, I guess, questions or emotions or actions that are, provocative or reflect, violence is an important thematic in his work. Sexuality, which is confronting and has been divisive in some of his works in the past, and but he's really playing with this sense of, where do we sit with this? And it's not about being shocking in its own sake. I mean, that's not his intention. It's really to put us in that space of discomfort where these things are circling around us all the time. I mean, we see them, all through, the media all the time. So he's really trying to slow us down and make us kind of be in that space of with these actions, with these emotions, and then where do we sit in relation to that? So that's really where he's kind of trying to put us, which is what artists like, I think, Sarah Lucas is doing with the female body and this kind of deconstructed female figure. Paul McCarthy, Mike Kelly, fellow Los Angeles artists who work with this kind of abject body and these kind of very kind of gender bending sort of performance works. So these were key references as well. And then just lastly, Jeff Koons is a very important touch point, another kind of controversial artist in many ways. But this work was particularly important for Jordan, and he talks about it in several interviews where this particular body of work, because it is dealing with sex in a very kind of obvious way, pornography in a, literally with a porn star in the works. But they're incredibly constructed and incredibly over-determined. And this direct gaze that Koons has with the viewer in this work in particular was very important because it's this kind of sense of knowingness with the audience. It's like we're all in on this together, right? And this is a place where we can be together with this, sit with this moment. So that was an inspiration for actually Jordan's earlier works where you have the direct eyes, the facial recognition software looking at you. So he took that directly from Jeff Koons and this body of work in particular.
Of course, I think Russell's beautifully set us up there. This work just didn't appear from nowhere. There's long histories to that. And in the essay we prepared with my, now the Vice-Chancellor of the University and was the Director of the School of Cybernetics, Genevieve Bell, who has a long history thinking around these topics as a cultural anthropologist, and she worked at Intel for a long time and built the future. I think if every time I turn on my television and watch something that's not free-to-air TV because she has the patent that allows us to watch Netflix or any of our shows on our televisions, is because of Genevieve's work as a cultural anthropologist. So when we wanted to situate Wolfson's work in a much longer history, and there's many places we could start, and I probably should acknowledge Yuma, that we're here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and pay my respects to elders past and present, recognise there's always been a place of coming together and learning and thinking through technology. So although I've picked a point in time here, I just want to pause and recognise it's always been here. Technology has always been here and continuing developed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the most amazing ways. But for this discussion, we could probably go to the 12th century and look at some really incredible works which flow through our engineering today. So often these ideas around camshafts and hydraulics, they're sitting in building automata or machines that move for prestige purposes. And they could be religious, they could be due to the court. And this is an elephant clock. And if you're in Dubai in a mall, you can go see a version of this. And the Science Museum in London have also done one. And this is quite a multicultural piece here. You've got a peacock representing Persia through the dragons in China. You've got turbans and Africa and India. So you're getting this many places coming together in a work that moves. So we felt that was important just to sort of explain that the cultural construct and the materials available have always been part of the way we relate to ourselves. So Wolfson's getting us to feel something in our bodies, and he's using the latest tech to do it. And we're just simply making the argument, oh yes, there's many before who've used the latest tech. And here we have clock mechanisms which have come out of Europe, have now made their way to Japan. They've pulled them apart and said, let's link it to our deep cultural histories around puppetry. There's these things, beautiful things called karakuri, and they do a tea ceremony. So we could wind this thing up and it would go over here and serve Russell tea with a bow and then retreat. So doing deeply human and respectful jobs for us. It's not necessarily a replacement, which is something we hear around our automation, but a celebration. So these cultural positionings, I mean, my robot journey is probably brought to me by Daleks and Doctor Who, and I'm still deeply scared. Had I had a karakuri serve me tea, I'd probably have a different attitude. So I think we're bringing a lot of who we are to these works. We could then jump to Melbourne, and we have a steam man. And often we look at R&D labs today as sitting in those big tech companies, or my wonderful science CSIRO colleagues. There's many places that innovation happens. Back in the day, it was in galleries. Galleries were the R&D labs where you would show off and do things. So no surprise to me that some of the most contemporary tech in the world at the moment is sitting down in that gallery doing its thing. It's come out of a robotics lab, but it's sitting here. And so the steam men were a way of turning up here in Melbourne in the 1881 exhibition. And it goes on to inspire Banjo Patterson, who's much lauded in our cultural history. But he writes this beautiful story called The Cast Iron Canvasser, which is a salesman selling books that nobody wants on a subscription service. And the canvassers who do that get chased out of town. So they build a robotic one to go do that job. And we feel that story is inspired by these steam men who are very much in the newspapers and the consciousness of creating a crowd. And they bring in religious overtones. They call him Adam Man. And it's opening up all these questions around who gets to create life. And you've seen that, so this is what, 1880s, you've got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein sitting in before that. And these are stories we constantly tell ourselves and feel deeply, but they're all coming out of the imaginary and then sitting in these other cultural genres for us to kick around and explore, because they're accessible. We actually don't get the word robot until just over 100 years ago in 1920-21. And it's in Czechoslovakia, who have a long history of the golem in Jewish histories, where you make a clay figure and it can keep people safe. You can outsource religious duties and protection to these limited animated life. And you may recognise a big office scene here, because you've seen this in the film Metropolis. It's certainly the same scene and big corporation that you have in any of the big robot films that we have around questions of power, automation, who's doing the work. And so Rossum's Universal Robots, or RUR, is one of the foundational texts that we've kind of imagined to build all robots ever since. The word is invented out of the Czech for labourer or serf, roboti, and they shorten it to robot. The interesting thing here is they're biological creations that go on and exterminate humans, and then it's a melodramatic play. And effectively the robots, the biological robots, fall in love and then work out how to create a new race and sort of question, are we robots? Are we robotic? Are we mechanical? Why? Because they're coming out of World War I, automation of machinery, using humans in war in terrible ways. And it's a big consciousness around power. And all our sci-fi is often questioning who we are and what will we be and what would that feel like and look like. So that's a really important aspect in this history. And again, sitting on a stage. And it was to quickly go through here, and then that inspires here the World's Fair. So where do you go to see the future in 1939? You turn up in New York, and Westinghouse Corporation are trying to sell electrical products and electrify the home. So instead of refrigerators, they turn their minds to building electro, who can speak and smoke cigarettes. And there's a delightful film called The Middletons go to the World's New York's Fair. So often this robotic man is reimagined and rehearsed and appears in our consciousness. So a close-up. And that brings me back to Yasha Reichardt. So I mentioned in 1968 she was working as an assistant director at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, and they're a serious arts institution, and she decided to put on this exhibition where you did not know whether the artwork was made by a human, a computer, or a machine, or an engineer even. They let engineers into that show. And they deliberately blurred it, and it really changed things. It flows through to art education in ground course in UK, where they're bringing all these cybernetic principles to effectively navigating the unknown, is how it flows through. But here I could not include Albert, given that we have a cube light box, and Albert came out of a lab in Cambridge actually, which had just measured the light in front of you, and then could use the difference of brightness and shadows to turn. So Albert would turn and address you, and that interactive element, same in obviously much better computation in female figure, but it's kind of the same thing, is sort of what the history of Albert, and we'll come back to him in a moment. Let's quickly go through these. Namju Pak is really celebrated. This is a work of his which was included in that show for 1964, and the interactive component here, when he first showed it, was performance art, and it was like remote controlled and would go up and kick people, which is somewhat provocative, but at least guaranteed a reaction. And then that work, sadly, becomes another artwork in 1984 where he runs it over with a truck on the street of New York, which is a little bit tragic. It's been rebuilt now, but there's a whole lot of other 14 kinetic sculptures in the show. And there's just one other one here in sound-activated mobile, which used differences in sound. And I was just picking up on the incredible work of the hands that Mark and Jordan have done, and I think some of the biomimicry that inspires these people. We look to humans to build, in this case, an articulated spine that allowed this work to bend and fold depending. And so children would whisper out this work in a constant voice and it would turn. Adults would shout and it would ignore you. But it was a big hit back in 68.
There's actually a clip in the space next to body sculpture. There's a video with a series of clips of Mark's work, and there's actually a kind of a centipede kind of figure that looks a lot like that, but it's sort of crawling along the floor. It's very uncanny.
But it sort of blends that that what is human, what is machine. I just want to go back to a quote from Yasha, who did an exhibition in 2015, somewhat recently, called Nearly Human, and she said, "The mind of the recipient, that's meaning us, the audience, must be kept busy arranging and rearranging what is known and speculating about what is not. This is where the magic resides." And I think some of the resonance of Wolfson's work and these works is the not knowing and us having to dwell in that question. How many other sculptures do people stare at for 30 minutes in this institution? Like, it's mesmerising, because I think we're playing around with that, what is human, what is not, and who are we?
Yeah. No, it's really forcing us to pause and spend time.
Yeah, just a small thing here. Albert's still going. So that Albert the box got reinvented as this, and it got packed off and sent to the Exploratorium Science Museum in San Francisco. And when I did my exhibition, I wanted to know, when did Albert's creator die? And to my horror, John, who's pictured here, is still teaching mechatronics or robotics in Queensland. So I had to invite John to Canberra to be reunited with his work. So that was a lovely sort of way to end it. I'd like to think that in 50 years' time, we can invite Jordan back to see where the world and robotics has moved on.
Thank you. So that's a great way to end our chat, I think, but we have a few questions. There's a question here. How have your conversations and approaches towards the work changed from the proposal till today. Has feedback and consultation shaped your approach? Yeah, I mean, as I said, the work's been kind of being iterated over about 5 or 6 years. So, of course, there were many conversations, both with the artist, you know, and he's an artist who's very open to feedback. He was always interested, you know, do you think this is working? How are you feeling? How do you feel about this? You know, he's really interesting in the way he really draws in all these different points of view. I mean, he has a very clear sense of what he wants to do, but he's also very interested on if it's working or not on the viewer. So there were a lot of shifts, you know, as the work developed over time. Quite radical shifts in some cases. I mean, there was initially some ideas to have some kind of interactive element that is no longer in the work, for example. But certainly, staging a work like this here in the museum is also very, very complex. And, you know, have the project manager here, Sally, who, you know, was full-time on this for a couple of years, just putting together a plan for just how we manage, you know, a work of this scale, of this complexity, you know, of technical kind of complexity, but also, you know, it's an industrial robot. You know, it requires certain kind of permissions, certain kind of approvals that are beyond just showing it in a space or putting a line in front of it. You actually need to get approvals from certain government bodies. There's a number of risks involved, you know, so that we need to work through all of those. So it was, I mean, for me, it was fascinating. I mean, I've worked on large installations before, but nothing quite of this type where work could potentially kill you. So, you know, all of these things came out of many, many conversations with, you know, area experts, you know, government bodies and organisations, of course, talking to you and your team. You know, you had your students come and do some early research on it. So all of that fed into both, I think, the way we kind of presented the work, but also how we really built that experience of the work with the artist. One you'd like to answer?
I was just going to say that the word feedback comes from Cybernetics, effectively. They were really interested. How does the output become the new input and what changes over time? So that's a foundational aspect of how we see the world. Yeah, so it has to happen. Like, you're not going to get there without it. The next question is, the work is both technically amazing and vulnerable. How do we ensure viewers are both exploring a vulnerability of the work and the technical aspects? That's a great question. Certainly, again, listening to Jordan's work, he really talked about being vulnerable in the unknown, of not knowing what he's doing. And I love that, because certainly my photo practice is often that. I don't know. Could work it out. So I'll build it off the constraints. What the light is doing, back to see me what I can and can't do is often a strong thing. And again, theoretically, cybernetics is looking at that as what options are available to you. So I think that it's the vulnerability. I think Jordan's worked really hard to bring that into the piece. I mean, I spoke there around Yasha's comments around what is human and what's not. There's a phrase that she helped bring into the English language called uncanny valley, which is this concept of, you mentioned it before, and it comes from Wushitora Mori out of Japan. And I think being open to that feeling, which I think the young people have a word for it now, it's called the ick. Being open to that and productive discomfort, to me, is a place of vulnerability, but also strength. And so I think it's partly on the viewer to be open to it.
And certainly from the museum's point of view, I mean, we really encourage people to just be with the work and see it. And we didn't do a lot of pre-publicity. It was really letting the work open, and then people could come and see it for themselves, because there were a lot of preconceptions about what this work might be, what it might mean. And I think if you are with the work, you know, obviously it's very technically impressive and very industrial looking, but you spend time with it and that technical part kind of falls away. It's really not about the technology at all. It's really about this experience and this feeling that you have when you're looking at this object at this point in time. And it changes throughout the choreography. You know, your feelings change, your emotions change, and you start, as I said, certainly for me, I started to forget that this was a machine and that this was some kind of conscious being.
Yeah. I just add, I felt you tidied up the technical too much. Like, I really want to see the room where it all happens behind. Like, I'm interested. So I'll probably too, because that's art to me too. But I would also encourage you, if you get an opportunity to see it more than once, do. I really got a lot more out of my second viewing. It's sort of micro movements and other layers of meaning that my attention was more nuanced. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the cybernetics?
Yeah, so there's a freebie question here. What are cybernetics of the future that are much closer than we think? Well, I'd like to think that we're building cybernetics of the future in my school. So we're new. We run a master's program and a PhD program. We have a great website, so you can sort of see the things that we're interested in there. And it's effectively people, technology, and the environment are deeply connected. So when we have a conversation around artificial intelligence, I would like to talk to you about the imaginary and what's going on there. And you've seen a little bit of it here, the histories of that. But there's a whole big infrastructure piece sitting behind that. Data, telecommunication networks. Oh my God, so much energy. Like, we get excited about the future, we're going to need a lot more energy than we have today to realise that imaginary. And so we sort of bring it back into a tech stack and those infrastructures, and then people to educate, maintain and look after those things. So I'm not going to sit here and predict the future. I'm going to tell you that the future is highly iterative. It is built in the present by the work you're doing in all your wonderful workplaces with the generations that you are preparing for the future. So it's a very active, engaged and considered level of agency in the present, where we explore who we are and where we've come from and who we want to be. So the future, I think, is full of opportunity for us and a chance to say no and push back against things that we don't want. So I think the future's already here is a phrase that we can throw around. It's just unevenly distributed.
It seems
It's
like
William Gibson, by the way, an author of Neuromancer.
that's a perfect way to close, I think. So thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you for all your contributions to this project overall. It's been really fantastic. And
Thank you for opening up your side of it. And thank you.
thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you both, Andrew and Russell. And I'm really excited to work with Andrew a little bit more this year. We're going to pilot a tertiary program here where we're combining the School of Cybernetics, the School of Art, and the School of Engineering, and with some of our educators here on site. So that's a pilot program I'm really looking forward to doing. Just a couple of notes before we all head out to dinner. If you haven't registered for dinner and you would still like to come, that is not a problem, please do. We do have the buses outside, so when we leave, you'll just go down the escalators and the buses will be waiting near the front entrance. A couple of people have asked about their cars, if they want to jump on the bus and then come back and get their car later. You have to make your own way back here to get your car, but your validation will still work. Or if you want to leave it overnight, that is also a possibility. Your validation will still work tomorrow. For our online audience, we're really looking forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 9:30 for our Teacher's Voice presentation. If you had any issues today getting into the Swiss lab, we've got some help for you. So just go to the information in the announcements on the app and there'll be someone there to help you. If you want to try and book into tomorrow's session, you can do that. But otherwise, we will see you at 9:30. And then our online audience, we have on-site audience, we have breakfast starting at 8:30 in the morning in Gandel Hall, and there'll be a breakfast panel tomorrow, so please join us for that. That breakfast panel will be really exciting. We have our very own Georgia Close on that, as well as Tony Albert, who I can see sitting here in the audience. We have Parsi, who you've already seen speak today, and we have Mary McGillivray, who is very well known for her Instagram and TikTok on art history, who will also be doing a talk straight after the breakfast panel. But if you're joining us for dinner, we can all go. Thank you very much, Andrew and Russell.